All right, going to talk about basic matrix operations, and we're doing a mini you will study further when you do pre-calculus. So our learning goals, we need to be able to identify dimensions of a given matrix. We need to be able to perform basic matrix operations, which would be adding, subtracting, and multiplication on the given matrices. So we should probably know what a matrix is if we're going to talk about them. It's just a rectangular arrangement of numbers of rows and columns. So here is a matrix that's named matrix A right there. Down here you can see we've got two different matrices that we're trying to add. Here we've got two different matrices of a different size that we're trying to subtract. So that's what they look like. What we're doing today, we're going to be doing by hand. And in the next lesson, we're going to be learning how to enter matrices into our calculator and some of the cool things that we can do with those on our graphing calculator. So, to meet the first learning goal, we have to be able to identify what the dimensions of a matrix are. This is important because what the dimensions are determine which operations we can perform on them. So, dimensions of a matrix are always its number of rows. So rows, of course, go across by its number of columns, which go up and down. So if you look here, we have 2 across rows and 3 down columns. And for that reason, we say that this is a 2 by 3 matrix. So rows by columns is how we're going to list that. And again, that's really important. You're going to need that when we enter them into our calculator, and you need that in order to be able to know if you are able to add, subtract, multiply the different matrices. So you can see right underneath here, in order to be able to add or subtract matrices, they have to have the exact same dimensions. So if we look here, my first matrix is 2 rows by 2 columns, and so is the second matrix. So that means that I can indeed add those because they have the same dimensions. So adding and subtracting matrices is no different than just adding and subtracting numbers. This is very easy. You're just going to match top left with top left, add those corresponding entries, and put it in the top left of the resulting matrix. So 1 plus -4 is -3, then 6 plus 5 goes over here, that's 11. On the bottom, -3 plus 3 is 0, and 7 plus -2 is 5. So notice both of our matrices that we started with were 2 by 2. Our answer is 2 by 2. So go ahead and pause the recording. Give B a try. Notice that it is subtraction, not addition between, so that makes a difference. And come up with your resulting matrix and then unpause to make sure that you have it correct. All right, so your resulting matrix should, going across the first row, be 2, 5, -7, and then 7, -4, oops, can't read my own writing, and then -8. If you didn't get that, then listen to the explanation here. 5 minus 3 is 2, that's the first one. 3 minus -2, minus negative becomes plus, so 3 plus 2 is 5. -2 minus 5, -7. 6 minus -1, that's the same as 6 plus 1, so that's where I got the 7. -7, again, that's a minus negative, so -7 plus 3 is -4. And then 0 minus 8 is -8. So hopefully you got that correct. Now we're going to talk about 2 different types of multiplication with matrices. The first one's super easy, scalar multiplication. And that's what we have in example 2a here. Scalar multiplication is when you're multiplying one matrix by a scalar, by a constant. And all you do for that is simply multiply each entry by the scalar. So that should be pretty easy. It's just like distributing. So we'll distribute the -3 to all of the entries here to get our resulting matrix. So -3 times -1 is +3. -3 times -3 is +9. -3 times +7 is -21 for our top row. Then bottom row, negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12. Negative 3 times 0 is 0. And negative 3 times positive 6 is negative 18. So just like the addition and the subtraction, the scalar multiplication should be very easy. Just simple operations, don't need a calculator, should be able to roll right through that. However, matrix multiplication is a little more difficult. So that's our very last part of the learning goal, performing multiplication on given matrices. And in order to perform matrix multiplication, just like you can only add and subtract if they have the exact same dimensions, with matrix multiplication, you can only perform it when the number of columns in your first matrix is equal to the number of rows in the second matrix. So if I look at B, this matrix, the first one, if I'm going rows by columns, that's 3 rows by 2 columns. So it's 3 by 2. My second matrix is 2 by 2. So no, they're not the same size, but to multiply, they don't have to be the same size. Columns in the first, which is right here, has to match rows in the second. So the way I think about it is the middles match. If the middles match, they cancel each other out, and your resulting matrix is going to be what's left on the end. So our answer here should be a 3 by 2 matrix. So if you multiply a 7 by 3 by a 3 by 5, middles match and cancel out, the product would be a 7 by 5. Now, that covers how you know if you're actually able to multiply them or not. The actual multiplication is a little more complicated because you have to know how it goes, but the first entry, so I know that my answer is going to be a 3 by 2. The very first entry, so top left entry, is going to be the sum, meaning I'm going to add together the products, so multiplying, of corresponding entries in the first row of A, so the first matrix, and the first column of matrix B. So I'm going to color code things here. Should help us out. So I'm going to take first row of matrix A times first column of matrix B. And I'm going to add together the products of those. So here's what that looks like. I take negative 3 times positive 1, and I add that to positive 3 times negative 2. So that's my work for my top entry. Then, as I move along, if I want to do the next entry to finish up my top row, that one, I'm going to take top row times second column. So negative 3 times 0 plus positive 3 times negative 1. So once I do that, now I'm going to move on to my next row and do the same thing with both columns. So second row times first column. So 3 times 1 plus negative 2 times negative 2. Then over here, second row, second column, 3 times 0 plus negative 2 times negative 1. And then finally, third row, first column, so 0 times 1 plus negative 1 times negative 2. And third row times second column, 0 times 0 plus negative 1 times negative 1. So that's my work. Now my answer, that should be pretty easy to compute. So come up, negative 3 times 1 is negative 3, plus negative 6, so that entry should be negative 9. Over here, 0 plus negative 3, so that gives me negative 3. Moving down, 3 plus 4 is 7, 0 plus 2 is 2, 0 plus 2, still 2, and 0 plus 1 is 1. And so here is our matrix multiplication answer. So if I want the first entry, I do first row times first column. Second entry, first row times second column. So I want you to go ahead and do C on your own, and then if you don't come up with the right answer, then stay tuned and watch the explanation so that you can fix your work. All right, so I'm going to write down the answer first so that if you have it correct, you can be done, and if you don't, you can stay tuned. So these were both 2 by 2s, which means middles match and cancel, so the answer should be a 2 by 2. And the answer here should be negative 15, negative 10, negative 2, negative 4. So if you have it correct, you can be done with the recording. If you did not, then pay attention to this explanation so we can get your work fixed. So in my work matrix, I've got first row times first column, so 4 times negative 4, plus 1 times 1. Then first row times second column, so 4 times negative 3, plus 1 times 2. Down here, second row, first column, 0 times negative 4, plus negative 2 times 1. And then finally, second row, second column, 0 times negative 3, plus negative 2 times 2. So there's my work, and then you can check it to see how I got the appropriate answers. We'll use purple for that. So this would give me negative 16 plus 1, which is how I got negative 15. Over here, negative 12 plus 2 would be negative 10. Down here, this is 0 plus negative 2, which is negative 2. And then final entry, 0 plus negative 4, which gives me negative 4. All right, so if you didn't get it on your own, hopefully that makes sense now, and you'll be ready to try some more practice problems in class. That's it for today.